With the goal of longevity, a major focus of the channel is to optimize biomarkers of as many organ systems as possible. With that in mind, resting heart rate, RHR, and heart rate variability, HRV, provide information about the heart, but also the nervous system and the adrenal gland, which is what we'll see here. Obviously, resting heart rate and heart rate variability are measures localized to the heart, but their levels are impacted by the balance between the sympathetic nervous system with the parasympathetic nervous system, or more specifically, the vagus nerve. Additionally, sympathetic nerve activation of the adrenal gland leads to the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine, which negatively impact resting heart rate and heart rate variability. The next obvious question is, what's optimal for resting heart rate and heart rate variability? A high heart rate variability with a low RHR is optimal. And if you want to see those data, not just numbers on a page, I have a new Patreon tier dedicated specifically to what's optimal for biomarkers, which currently includes the published data for what's optimal for HRV and resting heart rate, but additionally 35 other biomarkers, almost 2.5 hours of video content, 62 published references. And these aren't the reference ranges which you can get from any LLM these days. This is what may be optimal based on how each of these biomarkers changes during aging and or associations with all-cause mortality risk in the largest studies that exist. So if you're interested in that, check it out. All right, so what's my data? As I have almost 2,900 days of data for both HRV and RHR. First, starting with the data for resting heart rate. Now, the period that I'm going to show goes from August of 2018, when I first started tracking, through the end of June 2026, which is what we'll see here, with resting heart rate plotted on the y-axis against time on the x. And these data are generated by Whoop. I'm not here to say that they're the best. It's what I've worn since 2018. Any fitness tracker is generally good for tracking HRV and resting heart rate. So for these full year averages, and note that each data point corresponds to a single day's worth of data. So there's almost 2,900 days of data on this singular plot. Average resting heart rate in 2018 was 51 beats per minute. But then after that, year after year, I've been able to reduce it to an average of 49 in 2019, 48, 47, 45, 43, 42. And then the data moved in the opposite direction in 2025 with an average resting heart rate of 43 beats per minute. As a quick aside for what may be underlying that, I moved from Boston to Austin mid-year 2025, so that may have something to do with the data. Additionally, note that outlier that you can see there, 9,000 calories on that day. Now, I do try to be calorie restricted, but as we can see, I'm not perfect. I've never claimed to be perfect. And on that day, I just felt like eating everything. But you can see the majority of those days in 2025 and even going forward are nowhere near that. But I'm not perfect. I had to slip up. All right, so what about the data in the first half of 2026? Average resting heart rate to the end of June is an average of 41.6 beats per minute. And what we can see over this approximate 8-year span is that I've consistently reduced my resting heart rate from an average of 51 beats per minute in 2018 to an average of 42 beats per minute through the first half of 2026. But is a low resting heart rate indicative of youth or aging? So why would I think that? In this plot, again, we've got the average resting heart rate plotted against age, data for men in blue and women in green. And what we can see is that average resting heart rate for both men and women increases until around 50 years, and then it starts to decline, such that relatively low resting heart rates are found in youth, but also in older ages. The good news is that I've avoided that age-related increase. But when considering that resting heart rate declines towards the second half of life, am I experiencing resting heart rate decline through the second half of life? Maybe I haven't done anything. Maybe just my heart, my cardiovascular system has just gotten worse. And this is where it's important to measure HRV, as HRV provides more context to discern whether that low resting heart rate is indicative of youth or aging. And I should mention that I see a lot of people tracking their resting heart rate, but not HRV. And I see a lot of people talking about HRV and not mentioning RHR. In my opinion, these two metrics go together. They provide complementary information, and they provide more information than either alone. So if you're in that boat where you only track one and not the other, I'd recommend tracking both. Now let's take a look at the data for HRV over that same close to 8-year period. And now we've got HRV on the y-axis plotted against time on the x. When I first started tracking in 2018, average HRV was 47 milliseconds. I was then able to increase it over the next 2 years to an average of 56 and 58 milliseconds. I had a regression in 2021 to an average of 52 milliseconds, but then back on track going forward. 59, average full year, 59, 66, 67, but then the data, another setback in 2025, 61, And then the good news is I met my best ever full year average for HRV almost 8 years later, with an average for the first 6 months in 2026 of 72 milliseconds. So what we can see from this 8-year period is that I've increased HRV from an average of 47 milliseconds in 2018 to an average of 72 milliseconds through the first half of 2026. Additionally, I've resisted HRV's age-related decline for almost all of the years. So now that we've seen the data for HRV, we can address this question of, is a low resting heart rate indicative of youth or aging? A high HRV in combination with a low resting heart rate is more likely found in youth than at older ages. Based on chronological age, I should expect to see an HRV closer to around 35 and not 72. And if the data was 35 for HRV and 42 for RHR, then that could suggest that my resting heart rate declining over time in conjunction with the low heart rate variability would be bad news for my cardiovascular system. But that I've been able to reduce my resting heart rate while increasing HRV, that combination is more likely found in youth, so this is good news. All right, so what's contributing to these improvements? How have I improved my HRV by almost 50% over this 8-year period and additionally resisted its age-related decline? For 2 of these variables, I covered it in an earlier video, so I won't go over it again, including weight loss. I went from about 160 pounds to about 140 pounds, and I've been able to maintain around 140 pounds for the past year or 2, and additionally, properly balancing activity versus rest days. Now, I covered both of those in an earlier video with the stats and the numbers and the data points and everything, so if you missed that, I'll leave a link to it in the right corner. But I want to dig deeper. In digging deeper, I found that the combination of 3 variables explains 72% of the variability in resting heart rate, which is what we'll see here. And that 3rd variable is calorie intake. So when we look at the combined association for the average daily heart rate as an index of daily physical activity, you can walk for 1,000 steps on flat ground, but if you walk for 1,000 steps on an incline, you're going to have a higher average daily heart rate walking up that incline relative to walking on a flat ground. So I think the average daily heart rate is a better index of daily physical activity relative to steps. So when using the average daily heart rate, body weight, and calories, and looking at their combined association with resting heart rate, we can see that their combined association is significantly associated with resting heart rate, as the model F, this is a linear regression model, is so far below that p-value of less than 0.05, it's exclusively almost 0. And in terms of the adjusted R-squared, we can see that it's 0.72. So in other words, 72% of the variability in resting heart rate can be explained by these 3 variables. And what that means is that based on, if I know the information for these 3 variables, say the prior day's average daily heart rate, body weight, and calorie intake, I can reasonably predict next day resting heart rate with a high level. What about HRV? I wish I could say that it was also 72% of the variability was explained by these 3 variables for HRV, but unfortunately it's only 32%. And that's what we'll see here. So same setup, these 3 variables plotted against HRV. And now we can see that that significance F, the model F, is not 0, but it's very far below that p-value threshold of less than 0.05 at 3 times 10 to the negative 189th power. And then we can see that the adjusted R-squared is 0.32. In other words, so 32% of the variability in heart rate variability can be explained by these 3 variables. But can we do better than 72% and 32%? I mean, ideally, one would want to come up with a model for almost exactly 100% predicting next day HRV and resting heart rate. And with that in mind, what's the exercise dose? What's the diet dose? What are all the variables that go into that equation? And if we can do that, we can really get towards prescription nutrition, prescription exercise as an approach for minimizing disease risk, potentially maximizing longevity. So what about diet? How might diet impact HRV and resting heart rate? The best performing linear regression model that I was able to derive only explains an additional 2% of the variability in the resting heart rate, bringing the adjusted R-squared up to 74%. And we'll see that data here. This is a stepwise linear regression model where I forced those 3 variables, body weight, average daily heart rate, ADHR, and calories into the model. And then basically we're looking at other dietary variables, either nutrients or foods, that are significantly associated with resting heart rate after accounting for body weight, average daily heart rate, and calorie intake. But then additionally, I wanted to know which dietary components were significantly associated with both resting heart rate and heart rate variability. There are many foods and nutrients in my data that are significantly correlated or associated with only HRV or only RHR. I want to know which are significantly associated with both, because if they're significantly associated with both, then that will be expected to positively impact HRV while reducing RHR. And in terms of that list, they include vitamin B6, N-acetylcysteine, beta-cryptozanthin, collard greens, pickles, almonds, flaxseed, lemon peel, oats, and green peas. And we can see that their beta coefficient are all negative. In other words, relatively higher intake of these foods or nutrients are significantly associated with a lower resting heart rate after accounting for the three major variables that impact resting heart rate: body weight, average daily heart rate, and calorie intake. So what about HRV? That's what we'll see here. And using those same 10 foods, and also after adjusting the model, so forcing these three variables into the model that explain 32% of the variability in HRV, now we can see that those same 10 foods or nutrients all have a positive beta coefficient. In other words, these are all positively associated with HRV after accounting or adjusting for body weight, average daily heart rate, and calories. And then in terms of the adjusted R squared, they explain an additional 7% of that variability, bringing the adjusted R squared with this collective model with the three force variables, body weight, ADHR, and calories, and the 10 nutrients or foods to 39%. Now, 39% is not 72%, but that's still getting closer to that 100% of trying to explain all of the variability, whether it's through diet, how active you were the day before, whether it's your body weight. What are all the variables that can impact HRV and resting heart rate? And if we know that, we can really optimize them. Note that these data were through the end of June. HRV and resting heart rate data as a prelude or a quick intro for how the data might look for the next 3-month update. The data has been even better in July. And to illustrate that, we're going to take a look at 4 days of data so far in July. July 13th, 14th, 15th, and which it says today, but that was July 16th as I was preparing this video. And for each of those days, we can see HRV resting heart rate combinations of 80-39, 86-38, 73-39, and 86-38. Usually, when most people have an aberrant day of HRV and resting heart rate data, it regresses to the mean. But for at least this 4-day period, we can see that this is above average, above 2026 full year averages so far of 72-42 for this 4-day period. But in looking at all of the data so far through July, average HRV resting heart rate, which includes these 4 data, I could just stop at these 4 data and just cherry pick it and say, look how great my data is, but that's not the goal. The goal is to incorporate all of the data. What's the full story? So average data in July so far through July 21st, as I'm making this video, is 74 and 40. Now, is that better than 72-42, the previous 6-month average? Well, we've got a slightly higher HRV and a slightly lower resting heart rate. And that's data that would be moving in the right direction, as moving higher for HRV in combination with a lower resting heart rate would be more likely found in youth. If you're interested in more about my attempts to biohack aging or to slow aging, check us out on Patreon, where I offer blood test consults, but also post at least twice per day in 4 other Patreon tiers. We've also got a whole bunch of discount and affiliate links that you can use to test yourself that help support the channel, including ultralabtest.com, which is where I get the majority of my blood tests done, Life Extension as another blood testing company that I have an affiliate link for, At Home Metabolomics, NAD testing with Ginfinity, epigenetic testing with True Diagnostic, At Home blood testing with SciFox Health, oral microbiome composition, diet tracking with Chronometer, green tea, the clearly filtered water filter, and I should mention that I'm using or have used all of these affiliate links. So this isn't something where I'm going to have on the channel just to promote it. No, I've used or I'm currently using all of these. And when I say have used, NAD testing with Ginfinity, I did that more than 30 times. Epigenetic testing with True Diagnostic, almost 20 times. So I've used these tests, and I wouldn't support any of these brands if I haven't used them or I'm currently using them myself. If that doesn't apply, you can help support the channel by using the website Buy Me a Coffee. We've also got merch, including Health and Longevity Optimizer, which I've got on here, or other merch, including Data is my North Star, Figuring Stuff Out is my drug, or the ConquerAging or Dietary logo, link in the video's description. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Have a great day.